My name is Rachel Miller, and I never imagined I would be the one to carry the weight of this story. I am telling it now because for years I swallowed the silence, nodded through every demand, and convinced myself that if I just kept helping, my family would one day see me as more than the default caretaker. But the night my mother asked, "Who will take care of us now?" everything changed. That night revealed not just the weakness in my parents' bodies, but the fractures that had been splintering our family for decades. It was late October, a Sunday evening, the kind of night when the leaves had already begun to crisp and scatter across the yard. The living room at my parents' house was lit by the golden glow of a floor lamp, but the warmth of that light felt false, like a mask hiding what was about to surface. My father sat hunched in his recliner, a plaid blanket across his knees. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his breath shallow, every exhale carrying the reminder that his health was slipping. My mother, thinner than I remembered, perched on the edge of the couch with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. I had rushed over after work, still in the same slacks and cardigan I wore at the clinic, hair tied back in a hurried knot. Emily, my older sister, was already there, scrolling through her phone with a glass of wine balanced dangerously on the armrest. Daniel, my oldest brother, had claimed the armchair, his posture wide and commanding, as if he owned the space. Michael, the youngest, leaned against the wall, tapping his foot in a rhythm that grated on my nerves. The air smelled faintly of herbal medicine. A humidifier in the corner buzzed, sending thin streams of mist curling into the stale air. No one spoke for a long moment. The only sounds were the hum of the machine and the soft tick of the mantel clock, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, my father coughed, a frail sound that made my chest tighten. My mother placed a hand on his shoulder and looked at us. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "Your father and I cannot keep managing on our own. We need someone here. Every day. Not just a visit now and then." She swallowed hard, her eyes wet. "We need one of you to stay." The words fell heavy in the room. I felt them land in my stomach like stones. My pulse quickened, a sharp throb against my throat. I expected silence, hesitation, maybe even a thoughtful discussion. But what I heard next stripped away whatever illusions I had left about my siblings. "Don't look at me," Daniel said, his tone hard, his arms crossing tighter across his chest. "I've got a wife and 2 kids to feed. I can't just drop everything. Ask Rachel." His head tilted in my direction, his eyes dismissive, like he had just placed a burden on a shelf labeled with my name. Every gaze in the room turned to me. My sister Emily's lips pressed into a thin line as though she agreed but would not say it aloud. Michael shifted, his restless foot tapping faster, relieved that the question no longer lingered over him. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of expectation crash down on me. Heat rushed to my face. My hands grew cold. I pressed my palms into my knees to steady myself, but the trembling did not stop. On the outside, I forced a faint smile, the kind you use when you are trying to keep peace. Inside, I was unraveling. It was as if a bucket of icy water had been dumped over me. My body jolted with shock first, then the sting set in, sharp, piercing, impossible to ignore. My mind spun. Was I hearing this right? Daniel had just absolved himself in front of our parents, in front of all of us, and offered me up like a solution, as though I had no life of my own, no limits, no right to say no. My mother's lips trembled, but she did not speak. My father looked away, his eyes fixed on the carpet. Emily tapped her screen, avoiding my gaze. Michael cleared his throat, muttered something under his breath, and leaned further against the wall. No one defended me. No one questioned Daniel. I tried to breathe evenly, to focus on something real, the soft hum of the humidifier, the smell of eucalyptus in the air, the scratch of fabric against my palms. But none of it grounded me. My heart was racing, loud enough I feared they might hear it. If I stayed silent, I knew what it would mean. Silence would be agreement. A nod would be consent. And once again, I would be the one carrying everyone else's responsibility. I wanted to speak. I wanted to remind them of every night I sat in waiting rooms, every bill I covered, every prescription I picked up while they were too busy, too distracted, too unwilling. I wanted to tell them I was not invisible. But the words stuck in my throat. "All right," I whispered. 2 words, quiet, almost lost in the hum of the machine. My lips curved upward in another fragile smile, though every nerve had. The shift in the room was immediate. Emily returned her eyes to her phone. Michael's tapping slowed. Daniel reached for his coffee, satisfied. My parents exchanged a glance that looked too much like guilt. The decision had been made without a plan, without fairness, without even acknowledgement of what it would cost me. I sat frozen, my hands still pressed to my knees. The room moved on as if nothing had happened, as if a life had not just been quietly reassigned. But deep inside, I knew this was not over. That moment was not the conclusion my siblings believed it to be. It was the spark, the opening of a fault line that had been cracking beneath us for years. I could already feel the rumble of something larger coming, something that would split us apart in ways none of us were ready to face. That night, sitting in that dimly lit living room, with the mist curling upward like smoke from an unseen fire, I realized the truth. My silence had become their weapon. My compliance had become their excuse. And if I let it stand again, I would lose not only my freedom, but also the last shred of respect I still had for this family. I looked down at my trembling hands and thought, this is the beginning, not the end. When I finally drove home that night, the streets were empty, the trees bare and rattling against the wind like old bones. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, not from the chill, but from holding in everything I wanted to scream. The conversation kept replaying in my head. The way Daniel's voice had cracked like a whip, the way Emily avoided my eyes, the way Michael looked almost relieved to be spared. And me? Smiling, whispering, all right, like I was a child who had no other option. But before the argument exploded, before the silence cemented into duty, the evening had started differently. That is what makes the memories sting the most. I had walked into my parents' house expecting warmth, expecting maybe a meal together, a quiet conversation about how to balance their care. Instead, I was met with an unspoken heaviness that wrapped itself around the room like smoke. The living room looked familiar, yet wrong. The lamps gave off a soft amber glow, but the corners were shadowed. A faint smell of medicine mixed with the eucalyptus from the humidifier. My father's slippers were neatly lined under the recliner, though he hadn't worn them all day. My mother's knitting basket sat untouched by her chair, half-finished yarn trailing like a broken thread. It was as if everything inside the house was waiting, holding its breath. When I entered, Emily was the first one I noticed. She was dressed in a beige sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her hair styled into effortless waves. She greeted me with a quick smile, then returned to scrolling her phone, her thumb moving faster than her words ever did in my direction. Daniel, in his dark jacket and polished shoes, sat like a king at court, one leg crossed over the other, sipping coffee as though the night's purpose was routine business. Michael looked casual, sneakers tapping against the wooden floor, arms folded across his chest, like a teenager, though he was nearly 30. My mother had invited us with a message that felt urgent but vague. Come tonight. We need to talk about your father. I carried that text with me all day, trying not to imagine worst-case scenarios. Was it another hospital trip? Another surgery? I told myself it would be a straightforward discussion, a plan to rotate schedules, a way to share the responsibility evenly. That was the expectation. The reality was far different. Even before Daniel spoke, there were signs I should have noticed. The way Emily greeted me with, "Hey, Rachel," but without looking up. The way Michael shifted uneasily when I sat down, drumming his fingers on his arm. The way my father, usually eager to talk about anything, baseball, the weather, even his aches, stayed silent, eyes on the rug. I tried to start small talk to break the ice. "How was work this week?" I asked Emily. She shrugged without lifting her head. "Busy. Meetings." Daniel chuckled under his breath. "She means shopping." Emily shot him a glare, then looked back at her phone. Michael muttered something about traffic on the way there, though we all lived less than 10 miles apart. The tension was there, pulsing quietly, a low hum beneath the air, but I ignored it. I wanted to believe we were gathered for something practical, something solvable. When my mother finally spoke, her voice trembling, I thought maybe she would suggest hiring part-time help, or that we would create a rotation, each of us taking turns to stay with them. That was what I expected. That was what any family would do, I told myself. But then Daniel opened his mouth. "Don't look at me." I've got a family? Ask Rachel. The words still echo in my mind, louder than the tick of the mantel clock that night. In that instant, everything I had ignored, the vague invitations, the uneasy silence, the way Emily and Michael avoided my gaze, snapped into focus. They had already decided. The meeting was not to discuss options. It was to corner me, to watch me fold. I replayed every detail after leaving their house. The golden light that felt too dim, the untouched knitting basket, the way my mother's lips parted as if she wanted to say something but stopped, the way my father's eyes clouded with guilt. They knew. Deep down, they knew what was happening, and they let it. By the time I pulled into my driveway that night, the bitterness in my chest had turned into something else. A simmering realization that this was not a single betrayal, but the latest chapter in a pattern stretching back years. Because this was not the first time. When my father had his first heart scare 2 years ago, I was the one who left work in the middle of the day, the one who slept in the hospital chair, the one who learned how to read his charts, while my siblings sent texts that said, "Keep us updated." When my mother had cataract surgery, it was me who covered the deductible and drove her to every follow-up, while Daniel claimed he had business meetings, and Emily complained she could not risk missing yoga. Even Michael, who lived the closest, had managed to forget the dates. Each time, I told myself it was temporary. Each time, I promised myself they would show up next time, but next time never came. And now, here we were, facing not just a crisis, but a long road ahead, and the decision had been made before I even sat down. That night, lying awake in my own bed, staring at the ceiling fan circling above me, I understood something I had resisted for years. This family did not see me as Rachel, the daughter, the sister. They saw me as the caretaker, the stand-in, the one with no husband and no children to get in the way. And while I had whispered all right to keep the peace, something inside me had shifted. I could feel it even then. The silence that had protected me for years was beginning to splinter. I closed my eyes, my fists clenched against the sheets, and thought, this time they will not get away with it. Sleep did not come easily that night. I lay staring at the shadows sliding across my bedroom ceiling, my mind spinning through every memory that proved Daniel's outburst wasn't new. His words at our parents' house were not a sudden attack. They were the latest strike in a war that had been happening in silence for years. I remembered the first time I truly felt the scales tip against me. I was 15, standing in the kitchen with a towel in my hand, cleaning up after dinner. My father had been lecturing about responsibility, about how each child needed to contribute more around the house. Emily laughed and said she had a history project. Daniel complained about basketball practice. Michael, still in middle school, slipped away with his backpack. And me? I was left with a sink full of dishes and my father's voice in my ear. "You can handle it, Rachel. You're the reliable one." At the time, I told myself it was a compliment. Reliable. Dependable. The glue that held things together. I carried that word like a badge of honor, even when it weighed me down. But looking back, I see what it really was. Permission for everyone else to disappear while I stayed behind. Years later, when my father collapsed during a barbecue, it was me who rode with him in the ambulance. Emily was too busy taking photos for social media. Daniel had to check on his kids, and Michael vanished into the crowd before anyone could hand him responsibility. I remember sitting under the fluorescent lights of the hospital, my father groaning in pain, and hearing the nurse ask where the rest of my family was. I smiled tightly and said, "They'll be here soon." They never came. Then there was the winter my mother slipped on the ice and fractured her wrist. I was the one who drove her to physical therapy twice a week, sometimes in snow so heavy I could barely see the road. Daniel claimed his SUV had engine trouble, though I spotted it parked at the country club. Emily said she was swamped at work, though I later saw her posting about a weekend getaway. Michael promised he would cover one appointment, just one, but canceled last minute because something came up. That something was a concert. Even when the burdens weren't medical, the imbalance showed. During holidays, when money was tight, I was the one who quietly paid for groceries, who wrapped gifts I could barely afford while Daniel gave nothing but excuses, and Emily insisted her presence was the gift. Michael was too young back then to contribute much, But he learned quickly that if he kept quiet long enough, someone else would step in. The most painful memory, though, came 2 years ago when my father had surgery. I sat in the waiting room for 12 hours, clutching a styrofoam cup of cold coffee. Every time the doctor walked by, my heart seized, hoping for good news. Emily promised she would come once her meeting wrapped. Daniel said he'd stop by after dropping the kids at soccer. Michael texted that traffic was bad. By the time my father was wheeled into recovery, I was still alone. I told myself it was fine, that I was strong enough. But when the nurse asked if I wanted to call someone, I realized I had no one to call. They had already decided long ago that I was the stand-in, the one who stayed while they lived their lives. The pattern was always the same. I carried the weight, and they justified it. Emily would say, "You're just better at these things, Rachel." Daniel would insist, "I have more on my plate." Michael would mutter, "You know I'm not good with hospitals." Each excuse stacked like bricks, building a wall that kept them distant and me trapped. Lying there in the dark after that family meeting, I realized the wall had grown taller than ever. It wasn't just about who would stay with our parents now. It was about the years of small betrayals, the way my identity had been twisted into caretaker, servant, and silent supporter. I thought of Daniel, always loud, always commanding. He liked being the first to speak because it meant no one else's opinion mattered. His smirk that night wasn't just defiance, it was victory. He had shoved the weight off his shoulders and onto mine, and he was proud of it. I thought of Emily, polished and aloof. She had perfected the art of avoiding conflict by pretending not to notice. Her silence wasn't ignorance, it was strategy. If she never acknowledged the problem, she could never be blamed for it. And Michael, the youngest, always shifting, always restless. He had grown up watching the way I picked up the pieces and learned that if he waited long enough, I would step forward. His relief that night wasn't subtle. It was written in the way his shoulders eased, the way he let his foot stop tapping once Daniel had spoken. But what stung the most was my parents' silence. They did not defend me. They did not stop Daniel. They did not say this isn't fair. Their eyes told me they knew the burden was unjust, but their lips stayed shut. Maybe guilt kept them quiet. Maybe fear. But in that silence, I heard the confirmation of what I had suspected for years. They expected me to be the one. I pressed my palms against my temples, forcing back tears that threatened to spill. The memories circled like vultures, each one tearing at the edges of my patience. This wasn't new. This was the life I had been living, disguised as family duty. As the clock on my nightstand blinked past 3 in the morning, I whispered into the darkness, "No more." For the first time, the words didn't feel like a wish. They felt like a decision. The following weekend, my mother asked us to meet again. Her message was short: "We need to finalize arrangements." The words made my stomach twist. Finalize meant confirm. Confirm meant cementing me into the role they had already chosen. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the sky was heavy with gray clouds, the kind that threatened rain but refused to fall. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, watching the curtains shift in the living room window. I could see Emily's silhouette, head tilted as if she were already scrolling through her phone. Daniel's frame was unmistakable: broad shoulders, confident stance, leaning back like a man waiting for everyone else to fall in line. Michael paced near the couch, hands shoved in his pockets. I walked inside, greeted by the familiar scent of herbal tea and the faint buzz of the humidifier. My father was in his recliner again, the plaid blanket tucked neatly around him. My mother gave me a tired smile, her eyes darting nervously between her children. The room felt charged, as if invisible wires had been strung across the floor, ready to spark. "We need to decide who will move in," my mother began, her voice steadier than last time. "Your father and I cannot keep managing alone. It is too much." Before I could respond, Daniel leaned forward. "Look, we all know Rachel is the obvious choice. She's single. She doesn't have kids to juggle. It makes sense." My jaw tightened. Heat flared in my chest, racing upward into my face. Emily chimed in, her tone measured, almost rehearsed. "It isn't about fairness. It's about practicality. Rachel's life is more flexible." Michael shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "I mean, she's right. I've got my job and my place is too small. Rachel can handle it." The three of them spoke as if I wasn't there, as if I were a piece of furniture in the corner rather than their sister. Each word chipped at the dam I had built inside me. I could feel the water rising, pressure building, seconds from breaking. My hands trembled in my lap. For years, I had swallowed this same poison, being labeled the reliable one, the free one, the default choice. But something in me snapped that afternoon. I stood. The motion startled them, even my father, who shifted uneasily in his chair. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Enough. The room froze. Even Emily's phone slipped from her hand onto the couch. I took a breath, my chest heaving. Do you hear yourselves? You speak about me like I'm some employee you can assign shifts to. Like my life, my time, my choices don't exist. For years, I have been the one driving to hospitals, paying bills, sitting by their bedsides while you vanish into excuses. And you dare to call it practical? Daniel scoffed, leaning back with his arms crossed. Don't make this dramatic, Rachel. We're just being realistic. I turned to him, my voice steady now, cold. Realistic? You mean selfish. You have a family, yes, but so do I. Our parents. They are my family too, not my burden. If you think having children frees you from responsibility, you are wrong. Being a parent does not erase being a son. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Rachel, please, we are just saying. I cut her off. No, you've said enough. You've all said enough. Every time there was a crisis, you disappeared. When Dad had surgery, I was alone. When Mom needed therapy, I was the one driving through snow. When the bills came due, I was the one writing checks. Do you even remember the last time any of you stayed overnight at a hospital? Because I do. I remember every single night I stayed without you. Michael rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes on the floor. We thought you didn't mind. You never complained. A bitter laugh escaped me. Of course I didn't complain, because the moment I did, I would be called selfish, ungrateful, dramatic. I stayed quiet so this family wouldn't fall apart. But silence is not consent, and it ends now. The room buzzed with my words, the weight of them hanging heavy. My father looked down, shame shadowing his face. My mother blinked rapidly, tears forming in her eyes. Emily shifted again, her polished facade cracking. Daniel's smirk had vanished. I straightened my shoulders, my voice firm. If you want me to help, then it will be on equal terms. No more assumptions. No more dumping everything on me because I'm single. From this day forward, if I am expected to care for our parents, then so will each of you. I will not carry this alone anymore. Silence. A silence so thick it pressed against my skin. The only sound was the soft hiss of the humidifier, filling the void where their excuses used to be. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low. You can't just walk away from family, Rachel. I looked him square in the eye. No, but I can walk away from being your scapegoat. Those are not the same thing. The words felt like a door slamming shut, reverberating through the room. For once, I didn't flinch. For once, I wasn't the one bowing my head. That was the moment the fault line cracked open, the moment our family's fragile balance shattered. And though none of them spoke another word, I knew the war had just begun. The silence after my declaration stretched so long I thought it might never break. The hiss of the humidifier filled the room, soft and steady, mocking the chaos raging beneath our still bodies. My hands trembled, but I kept them at my sides, refusing to fold them in my lap like a child waiting for permission to speak. I had spoken, and I wasn't going to take it back. It was Daniel, of course, who cracked first. He leaned forward, eyes blazing, his coffee forgotten on the table. Do you hear yourself, Rachel? You're acting like some martyr. Nobody asked you to do all those things. You volunteered. The words sliced through me, sharp and cruel. I turned toward him slowly, letting him see the fire in my eyes. Nobody asked me? You mean the phone calls at midnight when Mom needed to be rushed to the ER? The texts that said, "Can you cover this bill until I get paid?" The promises you made and broke, leaving me to pick up the pieces? Don't you dare tell me I volunteered. You abandoned, and I filled the gaps. Daniel's jaw clenched. His face reddened, but he said nothing. Emily set her phone aside, finally, her voice softer, pleading. Rachel, we're not trying to make you feel unappreciated. We know you've done a lot, but you have to understand, our lives are complicated too. I can't just pause everything. I laughed bitterly. Complicated? You think mine isn't? Just because I don't post about it doesn't mean I don't struggle. I work, I pay bills, I take care of myself, and I've been taking care of them. The difference is I never used my life as an excuse to disappear. Michael, always the quiet one, shifted uneasily. He rubbed his palms against his jeans, eyes flicking between us. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but trembling. I didn't know you felt this way. I thought you were stronger than us. I thought maybe you didn't mind because you were good at it. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. I stared at him, my throat tightening. Being strong doesn't mean I don't bleed, Michael. It just means you never noticed when I did. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Tears brimmed in her eyes. Rachel, we never wanted this to happen. We never meant for you to feel alone. I turned to her, my chest aching. But you let it happen. Every time Daniel deflected, every time Emily avoided, every time Michael stepped back, you let them. You sat in silence while I carried the load. That silence cut deeper than their excuses. My father shifted in his recliner, his voice rough, tired. She's right. His words startled the room. He lifted his gaze, watery eyes meeting mine. Rachel has been here more than anyone. She has given more than anyone, and we've allowed it because it was easier. The confession hung in the air like thunder. For once, Daniel didn't argue. Emily lowered her eyes. Michael sat frozen. I swallowed hard, the weight of years pressing on me. I can't do it alone anymore. If you want me to keep helping, then it has to be equal. We will make a schedule, we will split the costs, we will share the nights. Otherwise, I'm done. I won't be your shield anymore. Daniel finally leaned back, his fists clenched against his knees. So what? You're going to abandon them? Leave them to fend for themselves? I shook my head. No, I'm giving you the chance to finally step up. If you choose not to, that will be on your conscience, not mine. The room erupted then. Emily argued that her job was too demanding. Daniel shouted about his children. Michael mumbled about his rent and his tiny apartment. Their voices rose, colliding, overlapping. My mother sobbed quietly, her face buried in her hands. My father sat still, watching the storm he had tried to ignore for too long. I let them fight. For once, I didn't jump in to soothe or solve. I stood there, arms crossed, listening to the chaos. Their excuses sounded hollow now, brittle against the truth I had thrown into the open. Finally, I raised my voice, sharp and commanding. Enough! The word cut through the argument like a blade. All three of them fell silent, their eyes wide. We will not leave this room until we make a plan, I said, my voice steady. Not a suggestion, not a hope, a plan. Written down, signed by all of us, because I will not walk out of here carrying this alone ever again. The air shifted. For the first time, they looked at me differently, not as the quiet sister who absorbed their neglect, but as someone who would no longer bend. My father nodded slowly, his frail hand lifting in agreement. She's right. If you love us, you will all share this. No more excuses. The room fell silent again, but it wasn't the silence of dismissal this time. It was the silence of reckoning. And in that moment, I realized something I had never felt before. Power. For years, I had been the backbone of this family, invisible and taken for granted. Now I was no longer invisible. And whether they liked it or not, the balance had shifted. The meeting didn't end quickly. After my demand for a written plan, the room fell into a tense quiet, each sibling shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The storm that had erupted minutes earlier had left behind debris, hurt feelings, unspoken guilt, and the realization that things would never return to the way they were. I stood tall, waiting, refusing to fill the silence with apologies. For once, it wasn't my job to mend the cracks. Daniel was the first to break. He rubbed his hands over his face, exhaling heavily. Fine, he muttered. If that's what it takes, I'll cover weekends. I can bring the kids over, let them see their grandparents, but I'm not quitting my job to play nurse. I nodded slowly. No one asked you to quit your job. We asked you to show up. Weekends are a start. Emily cleared her throat, her voice quieter than usual. I can do Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I'll finish work early. I should have been helping more all along. She avoided my eyes, but I could see the crack in her polished armor. For the first time, her excuses had run out. Michael shifted in his chair, his leg bouncing. I can take Mondays, and if it's easier, they can stay at my place once in a while. It's small, but I'll figure it out. His tone was hesitant, but the effort was more than I had ever expected from him. My mother's tears finally spilled over. Thank you, she whispered, looking at each of us. This is all I wanted. for my children to share the load, not tear each other apart. I turned to her, my voice softer now. We're not just sharing the load, we're finally acting like a family. For the first time in years, I felt the weight begin to lift from my shoulders. It wasn't gone, not entirely, but it wasn't mine alone anymore. The invisible chain I had carried for so long had loosened, piece by piece, as each sibling claimed their share. We sat around the coffee table, scribbling down the plan on a sheet of paper. It wasn't fancy, just names, days, and responsibilities. But seeing it written, seeing signatures at the bottom, gave it weight. It was no longer my burden, whispered and assumed. It was a contract, a commitment, proof that they had finally stepped into the role they had avoided for so long. My father's frail hand trembled as he reached out to touch mine. "Rachel," he said softly, "I am sorry for all the years you carried us without help. I see it now. I should have spoken sooner." I squeezed his hand, fighting the lump in my throat. "You don't have to be sorry, Dad. Just let us do better now." The meeting ended with no hugs, no laughter, no easy reconciliation. But it ended with something stronger: accountability. And as I walked out into the cool night air, I knew the balance of our family had shifted forever. Driving home, the streets seemed less suffocating than they had a week earlier. I rolled the window down, letting the crisp air rush in. For the first time, I wasn't dreading the future. I wasn't rehearsing excuses or planning how to stretch myself thinner. I was breathing, really breathing, with the knowledge that I had finally drawn a line. That night, lying in bed, I thought about what this fight had revealed. Families don't always break with a single explosion. Sometimes they fracture slowly through silence and neglect until someone dares to speak the truth. And speaking that truth doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like standing on a cliff, unsure if the ground beneath you will hold, but it is the only way forward. I realized that love without boundaries isn't love, it's servitude. Responsibility without fairness isn't honor, it's exploitation. And silence in the face of unfairness isn't peace, it's surrender. By breaking my silence, I didn't just reclaim my own life. I forced my siblings to see me, really see me, as more than their fallback option. Whether they liked it or not, I was no longer the invisible caretaker. I was Rachel Miller, their sister, their equal, and I wasn't going to disappear again. And maybe, just maybe, that was the lesson all of us needed. If you've stayed with me through this story, maybe you see a little of yourself in it, whether as the one who gives too much or the one who takes too easily. Families are complicated, messy, and sometimes unfair. But the truth is, nothing changes until someone dares to say, enough. And that's why I'm here, telling you my story. Not because it's easy to share, but because silence nearly broke me. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, know that your voice matters. Thank you for listening to mine. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real stories, raw and honest, make sure you subscribe. Stay with me because there are more truths waiting to be told.